Welcome to the lesson on Rethinking Globalization. The second wave of globalization has created winners and losers. It has favored multinational corporations and profits over workers and wages. Some nations have seen large employment gains and reduced levels of poverty, and others have experienced job losses and wage declines. The rules and institutions of the global economy have reinforced these dynamics and have sometimes tied the hands of countries seeking alternative paths. Globalization is very advanced, but the form it takes is not inevitable. Globalization and liberalization cannot be blamed for all the world's economic ills, but the performance of the liberalized world economy since 1980 certainly requires that we ask, can we design a global economic system that is more just and supports equity? The question is, can the process of globalization be redesigned so that it is more equitable, more just, more compatible with democratic politics, and more consistent with the goal of resilience of our economy, our polity, and our environment? Can we design a set of rules that allows for the simultaneous pursuit of national goals and at the same time the concerns and challenges of globalization, including tax evasion and climate deterioration? Trade treaties, including the WTO, have been skewed to the interest of international corporations. This will have to be changed, and it means allowing countries and their workforce more power and autonomy. A supporting idea is to create ways for countries to rely less on global sources of demand for their goods and services, and thus job creation, than has been the case in recent years, and focus instead on building domestic demand. This may require what economists call policy space, which refers to supporting countries as they pursue their own policies for expansion and industrialization. One thing we have learned in the long history of economic development is that there are different paths to success, and the democratic principles apply to the economic realm. Countries should not be forced into a straitjacket of deregulation and austerity, of free trade and support for the rights of multinational corporations rather than domestic workers. To accomplish this agenda for expansion, there are two ambitious pillars. One is a transfer of resources from rich to poor. We could imagine a Marshall Plan for the 21st century in which investment for economic development, poverty alleviation, and climate resilience are the goal. Funding of this new Marshall Plan could be supported in part by a global tax system that does not allow evasion through the use of tax havens and which requires a minimum tax on all profits. Just because capital is mobile internationally does not mean that we can't design systems for fair taxation. Countries should also be able to directly regulate the flow of capital into and out of the country so that they are not buffeted by decisions of financial firms based in other countries. Along with this comes a need for greater international cooperation on climate change. Some have called for a repurposing of the World Bank to focus on grants that support investment in green technology and more intensive use of renewable energy. We are thus imagining a system in which national governments continue to play an important role, but in which international rules and institutions are more attuned to power imbalances and resource limitations than they have been in the recent past. Professor Ha-Joon Chang, an expert on economic development and industrial policy, has done some far-ranging thinking about these issues, and I was lucky to be able to interview him for this course. Welcome, Professor Ha-Joon Chang, and we're so pleased that you could make time for an interview for our course. Would you first just introduce yourself and tell us your name and your title and your affiliation and one word about your research, and then we'll jump into a few questions.
Yeah. My name is Ha-Joon Chang. I'm a professor of economics at the Department of Economics at SOAS, University of London. My main research is on trade and industrial policies in developing countries.
So this is a course about economics, and the focus here is on globalization. And in the lectures, we've introduced some general concepts about liberalization, deregulation, and its impacts on the global economy. But I wonder if you could comment. In your view, what are some policies that the rich countries can adopt if they truly want to promote economic development in poorer parts of the world?
Yes, so many things they should do, but just to give you a few big things. Well, first of all, that they need to change the global economic rules to widen the policy space for developing countries. Yeah? I mean, they cannot build a system which that is based on rules that basically suit the needs of the rich countries. Yeah? And make economic development very difficult for the developing countries. So they need to allow, the kind of the more greater restrictions on the foreign companies that like the local content requirement that I mentioned earlier. They need to give the developing countries more freedom to use the quantitative restrictions and have higher tariffs. Yeah. Secondly, that they need to protect higher value added industries less, not more, than unprocessed natural resource products. Yeah? For example, the European Union has very low tariff on the palm oil if it's not processed, but it has a much higher tariff on palm oil if it's processed, yeah? Which basically discourages developing countries from developing palm oil processing industry. Yeah? They need to transfer more technologies to developing countries. Yeah? They need to provide more long-term finance for developing countries because economic development requires long-term oriented investments. And these days they need to reduce their carbon footprint and material consumption so that developing countries can have more room to grow without damaging the environmental sustainability.
Is there a case that in the long run, even this or in the longer run, this would benefit the rich countries to take this kind of strategy, which seems to be promoting development outside of their own countries?
Yeah, no, I would say that because I think it's in the enlightened self-interest of the rich countries to allow developing countries to use the policies they need in order to develop the economy further. You know, just think about it. If Mr. Deng Xiaoping accidentally picked up Milton Friedman's Free to Choose back in 1978 and opened up the Chinese economy immediately, I mean, China will be still a low-income country with a small market. You know? Since then, the Chinese economy has grown by like 20 times more. I mean, I forget the exact figure. So actually, the rich countries have bigger markets to export. You know, the greater investment opportunities in the developing world. You know? So actually, by forcing the developing countries to use this one-size-fits-all policy, which aren't even appropriate for any developing country, the rich countries are actually damaging their own economic prospect in the long run.
We've talked in the course about the origins of the IMF, the World Bank, the formation of the World Trade Organization. How could they be redesigned to better serve the purpose of broader economic development and responsible mitigation of climate change?
Yes, first of all, their governance structures need to be reformed. Yeah. So, first of all, the World Bank and the IMF, the decision making there is essentially $1, one vote. Yeah. It's it gives some votes to all countries, but basically the decision making power is according to the capital contribution that they made when it was set up back in 1944 and revised slightly since then, but not massively. So the rich countries basically have the majority in the decision making. And all the important decisions need 85% supermajority. And oops, I'm sure it's a complete coincidence, but the US happens to own 18% of the shares. Yeah? So basically, it can veto any decision. Yeah? In that kind of environment, the decisions are not going to reflect the desires and needs of developing countries. So that needs to change. Also, the intellectual contents of what they do need to change by hiring a more diverse range of economists and other people, because in the World Bank and the IMF, that you go there. I mean, that these people were all trained in the same kind of economics from a small number of the elite U.S. universities and a few kind of the universities in Europe, and they all think alike, and they may outwardly be diverse, there's someone from all the countries in the world, but they all think alike. And this is causing a huge problem in terms of encouraging groupthink and kind of restricting their ability to explore different policy alternatives. And thirdly, they should stop imposing excessive conditionalities to the loans that they are providing. I'm not actually in principle against conditionalities. I mean, if you are lending money to someone, you have the right to set some conditions. But the problem with the World Bank and the IMF is that, especially through the so-called structural adjustment programs, they have started imposing conditions that are way, way beyond their original mandate.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to your original point about kind of freedom to construct one's own development strategy and policies. So
right.
It's nice that you've come full circle. I don't want to keep you longer. I want to say that I really appreciate the point about diversity of economic thinking, because that's kind of the thrust of this course is precisely to talk about, are there alternative ways to imagine both economics, economy, and economic policy? And I just want to thank you. We're really fortunate in this class to get your expertise, your knowledge. I know you travel the world and are kind of respected as a development economist around the world. And I just want to really thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.